Hey man, I'm always excited to have you guys back here at Hope, but today I'm especially glad you're here because we're going to talk about it. What we're going to talk about is so important. It's a trending topic in our world that impacts our life on a daily basis, and it's something that I know God wants us to see, to care about, and to even do something about however we can. But before I tell you what that is, I have a question for you. Does anyone here love stories? Now, you might not read bedtime stories anymore, but confession, I still love them. I love to read a good story every now and then. Maybe you're not into those kinds of stories, but you probably have heard crazy, funny, powerful story at least once in your life. In fact, I want you to think of one right now. All right? Maybe you overheard someone at school telling a true story of something that happened to them. Maybe one of your grandparents has the same funny story that they tell over and over again. Maybe your best friend has an almost unbelievable story about a life-changing experience. So stories like that can be so interesting that you can't help but lean in and listen. And that's the thing about stories. They just don't entertain you. They have the potential to change you. They have a way of helping you get to know others better. Stories can help us see things in a different way. That's why today is going to be a little different than what we usually do here, because we know the power of stories, so we want you to hear from a few pretty amazing people in just a minute. In fact, their stories can help us understand the trending topic that we're going to talk about today, and that trending topic is racial tension. So, race is one of the things that we don't get to choose about our lives. It's something that we're all born with, and it doesn't change. But throughout history, there have been people who don't understand, accept, or even like people whose race is different than their own. And that causes racial tension, which is simply the struggle or anger that exists between people or groups of different races. No matter what you experience or your knowledge of racial tension is, my hope is that hearing these stories from real people with real experiences, today you're challenged to think about it differently. So let's go ahead and lean in and listen and learn from these stories.
Hey guys, I'm Jean, and I'm Korean American, which means both of my parents are Korean, and I was born here in the United States. When I was growing up, the school that I went to had people from all different cultures and countries and backgrounds, and a lot of my friends ended up being actually from the Middle East, and we always had the best time. When I was in high school, there was an awful attack on the United States. Some of you might already know what happened on September 11th in 2001, but if you haven't heard, it was the day a group of people from the Middle East crashed airplanes into really important buildings in the United States. Thousands of people suffered and even lost their lives from this attack. It was a really awful time. What made me really sad was how my friends were treated after the attack. People in my school were so mean to my friends who were from the Middle East just because they were of the same race as the people who attacked the country. My friends didn't even know the people who did it. No one realized that my friends were just as scared as anyone else who lived in the United States. But somehow, it seemed like people blamed my friends for something they weren't even a part of. I knew that my friends were really hurt by the things people said to them, and I knew it was wrong for them to be treated unfairly. But I honestly didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to stand up for my friends. And the truth is, sometimes people don't know how to stand up for others who were treated unfairly because of their race. Even though I did my best to comfort my friends in private, why didn't I just stand up for them in public? I've always wondered, what could I have done to help more?
Hey everyone, my name is Shane, and I'm biracial. My dad is Mexican, and my mom is white. Now, I grew up not knowing much about my Mexican side at all. It's not that my family didn't want to tell me about that part of my background, but it's just a side that I wasn't exposed to all that much. I remember this one particular day in high school. I was taking a Spanish class, and one of my classmates said to me, "Shouldn't you know how to speak Spanish already?" That one question alone assumed that I should automatically know the language just because I was part Hispanic. But I didn't. I still don't. Their question, it wasn't embarrassing, and it honestly didn't bother me at all, but it did challenge me to learn more about my Hispanic background. I knew there were so many different pieces that make up a culture: the food, the style, the history, the holidays. But I didn't know my own culture. I realized that even though I grew up mostly around one side of my family, there was still more to my life to discover. Some of us, we don't know everything about our race, and we're still learning. Was I wrong for not knowing everything about mine?
No matter where you fit into all of this, I'm glad you heard these stories. First of all, so that you can know that you're not alone in what you're thinking, feeling, or experiencing. See, each person's story is equally important. Each person in the stories we just heard looked different from each other. They all had completely different experiences when it comes to race, but they also all shared something in common. They were all affected by racial tension in a real and significant way. We've only shared a few stories today, but there are so many others we could have heard on this topic. You might even be able to think of a few more examples yourself. Like, what about the story of someone who was unkind? Someone who treated others from different races unfairly? Where do they fit into this? Those stories are important to talk about too. See, when it comes to race, sometimes our differences cause people to think of others as less than or themselves as better, which is known as bias. If we're not careful, bias can lead us to treat people differently or poorly, and that's discrimination. When we treat others worse because of bias, it can cause incredible pain, and ultimately it can create more racial tension in our world. But here's the truth. I want you to know today, our differences in race shouldn't mean anything negative, because God designed race to be a beautiful and unique representation of who God is. Here's how I know. In the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, we get details of how God created the world. One by one, God made everything we see and experience in the world, and then God made people. And here's what the writer of Genesis said about that. So God created mankind in his own image. Out of all the things that God created, people are who reflect God's image. Reflecting God's image means when people see you, they see more of who God is. They see more of who God is in the way you act, the way you talk, the way you treat others, and the way that you are uniquely you. The word mankind in this verse is important because it means all of humankind. That means there isn't one person, one group, one race that better reflects God's image than any other. There isn't one race that points to God more than any other. In fact, together we reflect the image of God, and that's pretty amazing. But unfortunately, you and I both know that sometimes the world doesn't see it this way. Because even though God made each of us to uniquely reflect his image, not all people act as if that's true. Some people treat people of other races like they don't belong. Some people use hurtful words or language towards people who don't look like them. Some people act out in anger or even hate towards other races. And not only do these things cause more racial tension in our world, they also are not reflecting or respecting the image of God in each other. So what do we do about it? If together we reflect the image of God, then how can we better understand how to treat one another like that's true? I think we can find our answer in Jesus. See, knowing Jesus changes everything. It changes the way that we see ourselves and the way we see others. It changes the way that we treat the people around us and those who look like us and even those who don't. During his time on earth, Jesus showed us what it looks like to treat all people with value and respect. He constantly stood up for and helped people who were hurt, abused, or treated unfairly simply because of who they were. And in doing that, Jesus was not only reflecting God's love to the world, but he was setting the example for how we should treat each other as well. One of Jesus' followers talked about this in a letter that we can read in the Bible today. I think it's safe to say this guy knew Jesus pretty well because he was actually Jesus' brother, James. Like Jesus, James grew up in a culture where some people were treated better than others. It was normal. It was so common that they may not have even noticed they were doing it. But because James knew Jesus, he knew that there was a better way. So let's look at what he had to say. My dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others? When James used the word favor, he was talking about something similar to bias. So basically James was saying, how can you say you follow Jesus but still treat some people like they're better than others? Because James knew Jesus set the example. And if we say we have faith in Jesus or want to follow him, then the way we treat people really matters. When we act out of bias or do things that contribute to racial tension in the world, then we're not reflecting what following Jesus really looks like in the world around us. James went on to say this. Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in the scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you favor some over others, you are committing a sin. You are guilty of breaking the law. That royal law that James was talking about is part of what Jesus called the greatest commandment. To love your neighbor as we love ourselves. In other words, to treat people the way we want to be treated. So if we wouldn't want to be judged by the color of our skin, we shouldn't judge others that way. If it would hurt us to be called names simply because of who we are, then we shouldn't use those names towards others. If we wouldn't want to be left out because of our race, then we shouldn't leave others out because of their race. And if we'd want someone to stand up for us, then we need to stand up for other people that we see being treated unfairly because of their race. When we follow that command to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, we're honoring the image of God in them and in ourselves. And if we don't, well, James said that favor or bias we might show towards others is actually a sin. That means it's something that is directly against the way that Jesus tells us to live. So when it comes to racial tension in our world, we have the responsibility. First, we need to see and respect the image of God in every human being. And second, as a follower of Jesus, to treat others the way that we want to be treated. Because remember, knowing Jesus changes everything. It makes us different. And that means that even racial tension can be common in this world, but it shouldn't be common in us. Remember, together we reflect the image of God. That means that every person, no matter their age, gender, or race, is important and should be treated with respect. Now, if you've been hurt or mistreated because of your race, I want you to know that that's not okay. The pain that you feel is real, and I'm very sorry that that's how you've been treated. And I want you to know that here, that's not okay. We're committed to making this a safe place for you to talk about your experience and to find people who are willing to walk with you and stand beside you through it all. And if you're someone who hasn't experienced any bias or poor treatment because of your race, you may feel that this is difficult to understand. Maybe like the people that James wrote to, you never really noticed it before. Or maybe you're someone who's trying to change the way that you treat people or even change the mind about bias that you might have had in the past. And that's amazing. I'm glad that you're here too, because we want you to be a part of that conversation with us. It's so important to listen to people who are willing to share their stories like the ones that we heard today. Stories that help us learn and grow and change and understand. So let's go back to one more time to what my friends have to say about what they've learned along the way. Let's check out the next video.
If you've ever felt like me and didn't know what to do when others were being mistreated because of their race, I want you to know how important it is to be brave and speak up for others when you see unfair treatment. Not just because it'll make you a better friend to those you really care about, but it'll also make you a better person overall. It may seem scary or confusing in knowing what the best words to say are, but I guarantee when you stand up for what's right and fair, speaking up is better than staying silent. And you never know. It can mean so much to the ones you stand up for.
If you're biracial like me and don't know the full background of your racial history, know that it's never too late to learn. Since together we reflect the image of God, it's good to know the part that your race plays in that. You can start by doing research on your family and asking relatives to talk to you about your culture. As you learn, don't forget to celebrate the great things you find, and even use this time to learn about other cultures too.
We know you have your own story, and so do all of your friends. That's why small groups are important. We want these groups to be filled with people who support you, stand up for you, and stand beside you if you're experiencing racial tension. We want them to be a place where you can ask questions and even begin to change your mind. We want this entire student ministry to reflect the image of God to the world in a way that we treat the people around us, because together we reflect the image of God.